Okay, hello. Um, so Danilo was supposed to join us today, so we could continue our re-implementation of flows in using Impact. Though he is sick, and as you might hear, I'm also uh, kind of sick. Uh, I've been sick since Thursday. Let's see. I'm just going to check my audio. Okay, yeah, it's here. It's a little bit low, I think. Maybe I can fix that, but I'm not going to do that now. Anyway, so I don't feel like 100%, but we should be good. Um, and what we're going to do is just continue the refactor of the family app. And I'll just keep talking about like the primitives and state management and stuff, and then we'll get back into streaming with Danilo actually taking like complicated state management flows from the CodeSandbox editor. So I have been working on this in the background because it was a lot of fun. And now we have a family app that loads up. Well, a few things. So we have, maybe I should make it a little bit smaller. Like we have our shopping list now, and yeah, this is for production, by the way. So that's working, and we have our checklists; those are working, and I'm currently now working on planning our next week, where I just finished implementing like the dinners, so we can add those. But if we go to dos, it probably breaks. That's what we're gonna work on today. But before we do that, I'm also going to just show you what I did here. So what we have now is a Firebase store. So the Firebase store is global. It's responsible for basically, like Danilo and I, we talked about how these scopes, how they work as a way to kind of isolate state and make state disposable within scopes. So for example, you can instantiate state on a page, and when that page is unmounted, you'll actually dispose of all of that state. That's one aspect of scoping. Another aspect of scoping is it's a data fetching boundary. So when you're in a global scope and you open a page, when you open that page, you can do data fetching in the component responsible for that page. And then when that data fetching is done, you create a new scope for that page with the initialized data. But a third aspect of these scopes is that they act as a way for you to separate domains and concerns. So for example, the family Scrum app does not care about Firebase. So I don't want to leak Firebase terminology and concepts into the application code itself, because there's enough to reason about there. Like you come from the context of looking at the app and looking at terminology in the app, and then you dive into the code and there's a bunch of Firebase. Wow, the sun suddenly came out. And there's a bunch of terminology there that's not related to the application itself. So that's interesting. I'm just going to close the curtains here. It's nice to have the sun shining, but yeah. So looking at this store now, as you can see, we're oh, don't need that. We're importing a bunch of Firebase stuff. We have our collections here that I'm using, and then we have the Firebase store itself, which holds the initialization of the app. It has yeah, and this is kind of a pattern that I realized is kind of nice, is that if you have for example how should I put this? If you have like a subscription that you want to initialize in the store, you would define like a function handle subscription. And then you would kind of put the subscription up here, but you can still reference handle subscription because it's like hoisted. Unless you do it inline. But then you have these other things. So I chose to make this function just a const. And that was really to emphasize that, okay, this is used within the public space. While the hoisted stuff, that's used privately. It's just a thing. Yeah, doesn't matter maybe. But it's interesting, like how you... One thing is fixing problems of implementation, but another thing is like what kind of patterns does it encourage you to do, and how natural does those patterns feel? Anyways, so what this public API does is that it allows me to create like a server timestamp. I can do sign in and listen to authentication changes. I can go and create collection references. And this just handles like actually creating a collection reference and converting to the correct typing. And then we have generic methods for on collection snapshot. So to some degree, I am exposing Firebase related things. I didn't want to create like one method for every collection. It was easier for me to just have the collections, and then I can use generic methods like to listen to snapshots on the collection, to listen to snapshots on a single document, and then I can go and grab a document from a collection. I can get all the documents from a collection. I can set the document on a collection, and so on. You get the picture. But I could have implemented it like specifically for every collection. So I could create like maybe a function here that would generate like an API for a specific. So you have like the same API for each collection. And then I would just generate that API per collection. Maybe that would actually be better. Anyways, just thinking. Oh, shit. Now I want to do that. But yeah, no, let's get the app running first, and then I can reiterate. Let's see. And then we have our grocery store. The way these look now is basically they do the same thing, only they reference different data. So the groceries collection goes and grabs a reference to the groceries collection in Firebase. And then we go and create a query to go and actually grab those documents. Like we talked about previously about how Firebase has kind of a weird concept where with the snapshot listener, that you can listen to snapshots and you get the initial snapshot by just subscribing, but it's still async, right? So you want to await the initial value. And if you're going to await the initial value coming from a subscription, there's like no good primitive to manage that. So what I do here is that I just go and grab the initial documents, and then I listen to snapshots on that collection, and I just update the query whenever there's a snapshot update, which in turn will notify any components using this. I also decided to put my new grocery. Where the hell did you go? Also decided to put the input here. So when I move back and forward, I still have the input there. Maybe I don't need that, but that explains why it's here and not in the component. And then we have like simple stuff for exporting the query. And I haven't quite decided on how I want to export these queries. Should they be called query? Should they be called groceries? Should they be called groceries query? But I actually discovered something. I'll probably mention that. Again, like not super important, but these are the kinds of reflections I constantly think about. It's like, how do you like optimize like consumption and clarity of the code? Anyways, and then we use mutations for all the changes. So even here, we just call Firebase delete document, but we use a mutation for it. So this is a promise-based API, and this is a mutation-based API, which wraps that promise and allows you to subscribe to whenever that mutation changes into a pending state, into a rejected or a fulfilled state. So that shows like very clearly how you want to have something around, like consuming promises directly in React isn't a good experience. And it's not about React, it's like in any UI based context. Consuming promises directly is not a good experience. You really want your UI to subscribe to changes, just like it subscribes to state changes. A promise is also a type of like state machine, or it has states, and you want to be able to subscribe to that. That would be interesting. Like if promises got like a native event listener. Excuse me. Anyways, so we have that one. We have what else? Yeah, we don't have to look at all of this stuff. It's basically the same thing. Only here I'm ensuring that I sort the dinners by when they're created and so on. And with a dinner, you can either insert, like you can create a new dinner or you can edit a dinner. So in this case, I'm allowing you to pass in a dinner with an ID or not an ID. And if it doesn't have an ID, we'll create ID. What's interesting about this is that we're not using signals to hold the data, and we're not optimistically updating our queries. We could do that. Like with upsert dinner, we could, instead of just doing setdoc in Firebase, we could reference our existing dinners query, and we could update it optimistically. But there's no reason to do that because Firebase actually does this for us. When we insert this document, it's like it's instant. So what happens is that we store it in Firebase. Firebase triggers a snapshot for the collection, and then we set the new dinners query result, which then updates the components. Okay, cool. So where the hell was I? I did start on something. Family store. That rings a bell. Yeah, we need the actual family. Do we have... Yeah, and we have family data, but I don't think we have a collection for it now. No. Collections, users, to-dos, weeks. So this would be families. Yeah. So this is just a collection that we're going to return. And that would be collection.family data. I think. How does this work? Expected at least to... Oh, fuck. How do we... It's kind of confusing. They have this... what's it called? Odd even thing. Like it depends on like, does your arguments end on an odd or even argument index? And that changes what you're doing. But I just want to oh, sorry. Am I just missing? Wait, Firestore? Oh, sorry. Yeah. But I don't need that here. Is that because I'm... Oh, you can choose. You can insert like Firestore if it's the root, or you can go and grab like a collection or a document. Yeah, that's my point. It's confusing when is it a collection and when is it a document. It depends on the index in the arguments. And you can get really weird errors. I was happy to find this though, these converters. Family. Let's go look at the converters. Because they are a bit verbose and quite repetitive here, which is fine. They're very explicit, but why doesn't IntelliSense find that? It's so annoying. Family, because basically whenever we try to store the family to the database, we just remove the ID and then we use the rest of that. And that's also funny here about Firebase. It's like, I want the ID to be part of the type, the DTO. But in Firebase, they're separate. Like the ID isn't part of the actual data you pass in. It's more of a reference, which is interesting. And then when we grab it from Firebase, we want to make a family DTO. And that family DTO just has these users, so we grab it from users. This server timestamps estimate, I can't remember this, but it has something to do with how it returns timestamps. You know, I'm just going to run downstairs and grab like a, what's it called? I can't remember the English word. It's like for my cough. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Right. Let's see. I have to excuse the noises coming from my mouth. Okay, so we have our family. We are exposing the collection. So in our family store, we're going to use our user to go and find the actual family document. And this store can actually be quite simple, at least for now, because there won't really be any updates to it. Like if I were to, like this app is only used by me and my partner. I had this big plan of like, I even had an implementation of how you could try it and register, and I think I even explored like Stripe to take money for it and stuff, but I find this really fascinating. Like this, the broad spectrum of interests you need to actually like do a startup. Like for example, Liv is the founder of CodeSandbox. He has this insanely broad spectrum of interest that I'm mind blown by that, because he's like this hardcore engineer. He has an incredible intuition as an engineer, and not just like a specific space. Like he does everything, like UI, APIs, infra, everything across the board, like Cloudflare, like service, like jumping from Cloudflare to service workers to some VM memory snapshotting implementation. Like, it's crazy. And there's so much motivation and joy in that. Yeah, I find it really fascinating. But then, like, he's also an amazing product developer and has so much energy and interest in product development. But then you're a startup. You need to be interested in like developing a company and how to do payment and all that kind of stuff. And marketing and developer relations and like, and his level of energy is the same across the board, which I find fascinating. Like for me, my motivation completely drops as soon as I move into the space of actually packaging a product. Like I have a lot of opinions about product and what I think is a good and a bad idea, but if I were to be responsible for like packaging an experience, I would be so demotivated. And then like going into pricing, like I'm instantly demotivated by that. So yeah, I like to stay here with my code, reflecting on like fundamental things about communicating code between developers and solving like low level problems. Anyways. Oh my god, sorry. So this query of ours, we need our family collection, and we'll get that from Firebase. So I'm also now just exporting like a hook directly from the store. I find that way more convenient. So let's go and grab our families collection. And the query we're going to have here is family collection, Firebase get doc, and this would be family collection, and then we give it the family ID, which we get from our scope. So the family store is part of our, let's see what we call it. Is it here? No, I think it's in the dashboard. Oh, sorry. It's in the page container. I call it the session scope. I could call it the family scope as well, but I'm calling it the session scope because it's a session which is tied to a user. And this family store requires a user. So, oh my god, sorry. So the way it flows now is that we hit this page container first. The session store is responsible for exposing this status, where we show the skeleton when we're authenticating. If we're not unauthenticated, we should still show the skeleton, but with the sign-in model. But if we're authenticated, we create our session scope with the related stores that requires the user to go and find, like reference the correct data. And then we render out the dashboard, and any nested component here can use any of these stores. Yeah, so I'm just returning the query itself from, maybe we should do family query. I'm going to try this. Cool. And then we should check out the component that we're working with here. I think it's plan next week to do's. Yeah, so here we have a bunch of type issues. Yeah, so here is the family. So what I've done now is that in the dashboard, you can see that I have this suspense boundary around the dashboard. That means if you jump into a page and it's suspending some data, it will show the skeleton. Oh my god, this is not working out. If it gets worse, we have to quit, but let's see how far we get with this. Like my cough. Yes, we had this suspense boundary around. Oh shit! I forgot to insert the power for my phone. Yes, we had a suspense boundary around the actual content. So if I jump into a page, like when I jump into the shopping list, oh yeah, I think I suspend there. I can't remember. So if it's still fetching the shopping list, it will show the skeleton version, which is a little bit weird, but I needed to put something there. But the point is that when we load up the dashboard content, I go in here and I actually go in and fetch a bunch of stuff. So you can see I'm pre-fetching the previous week, the current week, and the next week, for example. I'm fetching the to-dos and the weeks to show the size of them here. But you might like very quickly click it before, let's see if I can, yeah, before it's like done loading. And in that case, it shows the skeleton. And that's the nice thing about suspense. It doesn't show the skeleton if like it waits a little bit, as I understand it. I'm not sure how they calculate that. But anyways, I would actually need to change that suspense boundary, the fallback, so it doesn't show the skeleton, because that's weird, but should show something else. But what we can do here is we can say use family. And what's really nice about these stores that I discovered is that they are automatically bound to their inner scope. And what does that mean? So here, this family query here, well, it's not a good example. So for example here, anything that it references is from its scope. There's no this usage here. So that means that whenever I use a store, I can always destructure it and just use what's there. So here I can say family suspend. And then we get our family DTO there. Oh my god, this is really bad. Okay, let's try a little bit more. Okay, we need our to-dos, and currently these to-dos are actually, how do we use them? Oh, to-dos by type. Yeah, so this is actually an array. So use to-dos. Like in the old version, it was a dictionary, but now it's an array. Yeah, so here we call it query, but I think we're going to do this change now. We're going to call it to-dos query. Then we'll do this, because this creates this nice thing here. Now, one thing that's interesting about suspense is how it's blocking. So in this context, it's not a huge deal, because I will be fetching the to-dos and the family already when we get to this component. But you can imagine if that didn't happen, it would first suspend the family, and then when that is done, it will go and suspend the to-dos query. That will be the case with the use hook as well from React. And I'm actually not sure how to best solve that. You really need, yeah, what do you need? because you could say that, no, let's create like a use suspend, and then you would have like something like this, like an array of suspends, or something like that. But the problem here is that well, I guess it's not a huge problem. You could do something like that. And then it would kind of, well, the problem is, from React's perspective, it's just a promise. So you need to kind of you need to generate the promises. And then you kind of, so what you basically want to do, you want to do like a promise all. And the return promise from promise all, that's the thing you want to suspend. But the point is that a promise all is a utility. It's not a primitive like query or mutation. Queries is really the only one concerned about this, because it's the only thing that has suspense. But so it makes sense to kind of have a query and wrap that with a suspense kind of thing. But promise.all, the promise from promise.all, it doesn't make sense to do that in a query. It's really interesting. So what we could do here is so if we were going to do something specific for impact, we could do like use suspend queries. Let's see. Let's do this. Use suspend queries. And then we would just pass in family query. Sorry. Family query to do's query. And under the hood, it wouldn't actually use suspend, because when you call suspend, it will immediately throw the promise if it's pending. But what you could do under the hood is like use suspend queries, and then you have like queries here. You could like how would you do that? Well, yeah, just to have one example. So you could use ref, and then you could say promise.all. It's kind of silly to use a ref, because then you create like this all promise every time it renders, but I guess it's fine. Queries, and then the query would actually get the promise. It wouldn't suspend, it would get the promise. So now we have this promise all ref that we want to do suspend with. And then you could like do use ref current or something like that. Or you know what? If you had the... Okay, so imagine if we actually had the React hook. What you could do in this case is would be use family, yeah, promise.all family query. Oh, sorry. So in this case, you could do promise. The thing that's confusing to me about this, no, this wouldn't work. Like, this is the problem. And this is why React is so difficult to wrap your head around. It's like, when we throw this promise, it works. Like it goes to the suspense, but then the promise resolves. Like we have all the data. But now it will rerun this component. But then it creates a new promise, right? And that's not what we want. And this is the really tricky part, because you need some kind of caching mechanism that deals with this. And that cache can't live within the component scope, because you risk like that state of the component being disposed, and then you kind of lost this promise. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah, I wonder how I would do this. Maybe we shouldn't focus too much on this. It's more like a reflection. Oops, sorry. But it's really interesting how you would go about solving that. Because from the perspective of impact, as I said, it's like it's a utility. It shouldn't matter what queries, even though there's like a specific primitive for this. It shouldn't matter what queries you use. So, for example, I could have in one of the stores, I could have created like a query that just returns family query dot promise and to do query dot promise, for example. So that would be a way to solve this. So now I can do all data query, and then I could do all data query suspend. And then it would just run this stuff, and it would work just fine. And you can move away and back and forward in your app, and it doesn't matter. It will just resolve this. But you wouldn't want to create these specific queries in your stores. This is more about the UI and when the UI needs the data, while their stores are just generically providing the data. So you would want it's almost like this is really fascinating to me. Like, how would you actually go about solving this? Like, you can also do things like compose is a really bad term, or like suspend with to do query. And then the suspend with would kind of keep a reference to this promise. But the problem here is that the query is there to have the manage the promise of the family query. But now we're creating this other kind of promise. That isn't really the query's responsibility. So it kind of lives in between these two different worlds. Maybe there's something I'm not thinking about here. Probably is. It's really interesting. Like, one thing you could also do is you could actually just fetch them. So that's a non-blocking thing. That could be how you solve it. It's like, okay, if you don't want blocking suspense because you have multiple sources for data, don't use suspense. Just use fetch and then check the status. So when all of them are fulfilled, then you just keep rendering, and then you manually return like a loading state. Maybe that is how it should be solved. I wonder if any of the other Yeah, use query, suspend multiple queries. I wonder if they oh, that's would like to get support. Yeah, that's interesting. Parallel queries. Yeah, but this is using suspense, right? Or are they? Yeah, I guess you could do that. Like, it would probably you have queries, and then you would kind of put all the query keys together as a new unique parallel key, and that keeps a reference to the promise. That makes sense. That does make sense. But that's dynamic, right? We are not dynamic. We're static about our queries because they're defined in the stores. Okay, sorry, this stream is going to be me reflecting on this problem. I like to reflect on problems by talking about them. We're probably not going to solve this now, but it's nice to talk about it. So how would you create a utility for suspending multiple queries? Maybe, yeah, you can't use the user from React because the promise will always be new because you're using promise all. The promise is always new, and that doesn't work. The promise has to live somewhere where it can be referenced. And as I mentioned, it would be weird to put it inside a store. Why is my camera just slowly dying here? Just 2 seconds. I'm not getting any charging indication on my phone for some reason. That's really weird. Hello, Mr. Phone. That sucks. How do we fix this? I'm gonna try to pause it and see if that. Hello. Why aren't you charging, phone? Maybe it's a bug. I do get this weird like feedback from the phone when I plug it in, but for some reason, what should we do about this? Because we have like, okay, let's just hope it lasts. I don't care. Let's hope it lasts. If I'm suddenly gone, it's because the camera doesn't. It's my phone is out of electricity. That's weird. Or battery. Where were we? Yeah, so we have this promise all. That's what we need, right? This represents parallel fetching of data. But where the hell should that promise live? It needs to live outside of the component. Because the component scope is it's killed. I think. I'm not actually sure about that. Like if you suspend a component and you run useState, for example, I think it might clear that state when the suspense returns or resumes. At least you're probably not guaranteed that it's still there. That's like typical React. So then we would just create a new promise all. But maybe that is fine, because the promises that it wraps around is already resolved. So it would be insanely quick to resolve them. Even from the documentation of the use hook, it will actually wait a tick, like a micro task, before going to suspense, as I understand it. And that is to deal with promises that are already resolved. So that would mean that you could do something like, if we go back to our previous suggestion, so we have like family to-dos equals use suspend queries. You could do this and family query, to-dos query, and then in the implementation of that, use suspend queries. You could do, I guess this would be like the most proper way to do it. Promise, use state, and then you will you have the, have the queries here, and then you do like promise.all queries map query.promise. Then we grab the promise from each of them, and if the query hasn't been fetched before, it will do that when you try to grab the promise. Or if it's already resolved, it's already resolved. And then you return use promise. I think that's how it would have to work. But as I said, when the suspense resumes and run this again, if this promise, like if this state of this use state is like disposed, it will do yet another promise.all and creating a new promise instead of returning. Because what happens when this runs is that React will enhance that promise with some new properties to describe its state, if it's resolved or rejected or whatever. And when it resumes here and it's still the same promise, then it will just use that and resolve. But if not, it will create a new promise all, but then the queries are actually resolved. So that means it's just a micro task tick or whatever it's called to figure out that everything is actually resolved, which React does handle. Like, it's not perfectly optimized, but typically that would be the case, I guess. So that's my conclusion. We can do this when React gets official support for promises. We could have Impact could expose like use suspend queries, which uses the official React use hook. Yeah. At that time, maybe you would just do maybe at that time you wouldn't necessarily do like a family query suspend even. You could do use family query dot promise. Like, that would have the same effect. These two will be equal. The problem is this freaking promise all. Like, it needs to live somewhere. And that's not something you can express within the component scope without using useState or something. Like, who knows? Maybe maybe React will actually like use all. Maybe they will do something like this. Who knows? You know what we could also do? Hmm. You know what we could also do? Maybe it would be possible to like the thing about calling suspend is that it throws, right? Or it might throw. So what it actually could also do, I think, you could just try. So you will kind of have resolved queries. So you would just create an array, and then you would just try to suspend them. Push. The problem though is that it wait, you would actually this is interesting. You would have to go through queries for each, and then you would have to try to push it. Because you want to be able to move through all of them. Oh, this is so interesting. Okay, this is funny. So resolve queries. So the intention here is that we're just going to try to populate the resolve queries by pushing the suspend response into it. The thing is that if it's pending or if it's an error, it will actually throw. And if that's the case, we do want to throw again. But we don't want to throw again until we've tried to suspend all of them. That's the point, because that triggers the data fetching. So what we could do, we could like reduce, and then we could say query, and then has errored. Or not has error, but has thrown. The problem with this though is that you don't know. Well, I guess that doesn't matter. Like the point is you don't know if it throws because, so this might be a promise. So one of them might be pending, but one of them might be erroring. But I think that's fine, right? So we just return E. So it's undefined to throw. So if to throw, throw to throw. So what this basically means is this is interesting because this is something we could do now that would make sense. Like the implementation might seem super weird, but what happens here is that we have this list of queries that we pass in, and then we reduce over them. Yeah, but this reduce is super weird. So what we could do, to better express this, is that we start out with an array, and what we want to do, we want to concat this. If it's resolved, it will just, if all the queries are resolved, it will just concatenate the result of them together, and that's what we want to return. But we might also return either it's a promise, a pending promise, or it's an actual error. It's definitely not an array in this case. So the question is, if we say if not this array, we'll just return it again. So that means if we have returned like a promise or an error, we'll just keep returning that until it exhausts. Maybe we should just use a for loop here. Yeah, sorry. That's much better. So for, can I use const here? I can't remember. Query of queries. Yeah, this is much better. So what we want to do is we want to try doing this again. Now, yeah, this will, I don't know why I go to reduce. Reduce is a really hard thing to wrap your head around compared to just a for loop. So what we want to do is say resolve queries, push, and if it errors, we we don't want to throw immediately. Unresolved query. We want to say that we have an unresolved query. And then if we have an unresolved query at the end of this, we're going to throw that unresolved query. Or we'll return the resolved queries. Okay, at least this makes more sense. So first time we go through this, use suspend queries, we go through each query and we push the suspend result into resolve queries. Yeah. And then if everything is resolved, it will just be like unresolved query will be undefined and it returns those resolved queries. But if any of these queries has an error, that might be a promise or it might be an actual error that's put into an unresolved query. So if you have like 5 queries, it might be like 3 of them, maybe 2 of them throws a promise and 1 of them throws an error. So you might get into a situation where it will actually wait first and then, like, depending on which of the queries errors versus is pending, it might actually like go to the suspense boundary and just wait. And then it will finally, when everything is not pending, there might be an error there, and then it shows the error, which is fine. Or it might show the error immediately. And then like the pending stuff will just, yeah, resolve itself. That makes sense, I think. But I did want to kind of change this. So yeah, but we can't safely do that. I think it needs to work like this. I was thinking to kind of just put everything here, even like the errors, into this array, and then we would evaluate the array if it had any errors. You know what we could do? Pending query, error query, or rejected. Yeah. So what we could do is, if e instance of promise would say pending query equals e, else rejected query equals e. And then if we have a rejected query, we'll throw that first, because this is the thing. I think that will be the best implementation, because then it doesn't matter how many queries you have. If one of them gets an error, that will immediately show it. We won't wait for the others to actually resolve. And then we have, if we have a pending query, we'll throw that pending query. Yeah, this is how it could work. And then that would be a primitive coming from impact, use suspend queries to do parallel suspending. We should try that. Should at least try it. Okay, cool. I'm going to actually implement that. And then we didn't actually do much on the app here. But the point of this stream is to just talk about state management and like these small complexities and how to think about things and where are things confusing and how can we make things better and all that stuff. But what we can do here now is, when this is in place, we can say family to-dos equals use suspend queries. And then we say family query to-dos query. And then it works with this implementation. That's nice. Okay, cool. That's all we had time for. Thanks for following along, and hopefully on Thursday we'll have Danilo joining us, and we can actually finally implement this create PR flow using impact. That's gonna be nice. Cool. I guess that's it. Bye for now.